right, today we're going to produce a basic bean and ham soup. Now there's three types of soup we'll be demonstrating on this series: a broth-based soup, a bean soup, and a chili. Now these three soups can be produced with a healthy amount of vegetable and lean protein. We won't be producing any cheesy soups or creamy soups whatsoever. But when I say formula, I mean a process that you duplicate each time, and if you do so, you'll produce a quality product. You just vary a few ingredients, but you use the same formula. Okay, we talk about the formula for health: eating right, exercising, getting rest, managing stress, and taking care of your spine and nervous system. Well, there is a formula for producing a quality bean soup. All right, and that always starts with a mirepoix. Now today we're using a traditional mirepoix: onion, celery, and carrot. All right. Now, if you're using a Cajun or a spicy type of Mexican dish, you want to substitute carrot for bell pepper, or even spicier peppers there. But the first thing we need to do is sweat the mirepoix. What I mean by sweating is we're going to cook the onions first on a low heat so that they kind of lightly simmer. We're going to make them translucent and kind of soft. And what they're going to do is release a lot of their vital sugars and produce a really deep base of flavor. So that's the first thing we're going to do here. So let's do that. So what we're going to do is start with a cold pot, or what we call a slow pot. So you're going to turn the heat on and then put the oil in. Now if you were sauteing, you'd wait till the pot got hot before adding the oil. But what we want to do is put the olive oil in now, enough to just lightly coat the bottom of the pan, and put the onions right in. All right. This will start the process slow without any browning. Okay. So we're going to put all those onions in, and a very important step now is to add a little bit of salt. Salt's going to draw the liquid out of the onions, and it's going to help convert the starches to sugars. We're also going to put some pepper in at this point as well. Now typically if I was producing this just on my own, I would be sauteing, or I should say sweating, the onions while I was preparing the other mirepoix. Okay, that saves you time. So you're sweating the onions, you go back to the board, you start preparing the celery and carrot. All right? So you want to let that start to come up to simmer slow. So as you can hear, the onions are starting to sweat a little bit, and while we're waiting for them to caramelize, we're going to talk a little bit about the ham. Now I like to use smoked meat in a very small proportion to give additional flavor, whether it be a ham hock, and this is a smoked pork shoulder, in some cases turkey kielbasa, what have you. A little bit of smoked meat goes a long way. Right? It adds a tremendous amount of flavor, particularly when we're talking about bean soups. All right? So this little bit is going to produce 20 quarts of soup here. All right? So if you divide that by 20, the amount of unhealthy, so to speak, meat that you're getting there is very, very small. And this is a principle that you see in Chinese and Italian cooking, is they use a very little bit of proteins and they use a lot of vegetables. So you see we're using a lot of vegetables, a lot of beans, chicken stock, which is all healthy, parsley and so forth, and just a little bit of smoked meat will go a very long way. Now another ingredient that we're going to use today is garlic. Now garlic is going to go in after the onions have kind of started to reduce a little bit, kind of gotten a little translucent. Usually, if you're going to use garlic, it has to go in with the onions before the celery and carrot. Okay? So how we process this bulb of garlic is you want to push down, kind of break it up a little bit. And today we're probably using about 4 cloves. All right? Now, what you want to do, you see the garlic has a tail and a root. You want to grab it by the tail, put it on its side, whack it once on the back, once on the side, and you can see that the garlic comes right out. I'm going to trim this little bit of root off, and then you want to slice it lengthwise, just like so. That's going to release a lot of flavor, but not release too much so where it dissipates. All right, so now we're going to add the garlic to the onions now that it's been cooking for about 5 minutes. Onions, garlic are in the same family. They're in the lily family, and the lily family of vegetables is one of the most healthy, antibacterial, antioxidant-rich vegetables that you can eat. All right, so we're going to let these onions sweat down another 3 or 4 minutes before we add the next layer, which is the celery and the carrot. All right, so the onions are pretty much ready to go. I always start with the onions when sweating the mirepoix because I like the flavor of the onions really being dissolved into the soup. All the essential sugars that have been transferred add a definitely depth of flavor that you need to have. Next thing we do, as the onions have gotten a head start, is then add the celery and the carrot. So we're going to add that now. All right, so now here you see the onions, they're sweated. They're not browning, but they're translucent and they're kind of soft. So now we're ready to add the celery. Goes right on in there. Now we're going to let these sweat another 7 minutes or so. You want to let this kind of cook down. And what you see here is about a third of the volume of the pot of raw mirepoix. And when it's finished cooking, it should be about a quarter of the volume of your soup. And then you're going to add the rest of your ingredients. All right? You want to make sure this is stirred up real good. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is seasoning. Now there's fresh herbs, there's dried herbs like the bay leaf you see here. This is Italian flat leaf parsley. And also have some powdered herbs, which is a blend of paprika and chipotle chili powder. All right. Each has its own stage in which it's best added. Now fresh herbs are generally best put in at the very end. However, half of them can be put in during the cooking process to add a different depth of flavor. All right, so Italian flat leaf parsley is one of the best, most versatile parsleys there are. It's one of my favorites. And if in soups, I generally leave it in a big, coarse cut. All right. Now, when it comes to that, I probably put half in when I'm ready to add the stock, and the other half right towards the end of the soup. Each will add a different depth of flavor. Now, a dried herb, you generally want to put in right when you're done the mirepoix and sweating any other vegetables. They're going to contribute during the whole cooking process. They release flavor slower. Now, a powdered herb like a chili powder or cumin or anything along those lines needs to be added before you put any liquid into the soup. It's a huge step here. If you don't add it before you put the liquid, it won't release any essential oils from the powdered spices. Right now we can see that the mirepoix has been reduced to about 25% of the volume of the pot. At this point, we're going to add the dried herbs, which are the bay leaf. We're going to add the spices, which is the chipotle and the paprika seasoning. All right. And what we want to do is allow that to cook down in there, and all the essential oils are going to then release. So we're going to stir that in there and let it cook for 2-3 minutes more. We're also going to add half the parsley at this point. We're also going to add the pork shoulder. Let it cook 2-3 minutes more. So now that the mirepoix is finished sweating, we've added the spices and dried herbs. Also, we've added the pork shoulder. The next step is to add the final ingredients. We have here chicken stock. We have 8 quarts. We have a healthy amount of white bean, and we have a couple of cans of tomato puree. All right. Now, the white beans were canned. They were thoroughly rinsed, and I'm not opposed to canned beans if you wash them and rinse them thoroughly. They're a time saver. They're inexpensive, and quite frankly, dried beans from scratch add about an hour and a half to overnight to the cooking process. So canned beans are a good alternative as long as you rinse them thoroughly. So the next thing we're going to add is the tomato puree and the chicken stock. Tomato puree is going to add some flavor, but it's going to add a really nice orangey kind of coloration to the dish, to the soup. So we're going to add 2 cans of that. Make sure you get it all in there. And we're going to add the chicken stock. Doesn't matter if you add one or the other first, it's just what you're ready to add at this stage. We're going to leave room for the beans, so you're going to probably make it 2/3 full, and you'll wait till it comes up to the simmer. So let's talk a little bit about beans. Now, beans are very high in protein, very high in fiber, very high in B vitamins. They add a tremendous amount of meat to the dish, so to speak, in terms of volume. They add a lot of texture, flavor, and if you treat them properly, they will always produce a good soup for you. So we're going to add those now. Since the stock has been simmering, we're ready to go. Beans will start to lose some volume as you cook them, so you want to have a lot of volume of bean in there. All right? You want to almost make it so that you can't fit another bean in there, and eventually it'll break down and make a very thick and hearty soup. I think I can fit one more. There you go. All right, so you can see the volume has been reduced by 1 inch or 2, and the soup is thickening up. Now, the next step is very critical in bean soups, and something that I recommend that you do. I have a potato masher. All right, so what I'm going to do is actually mash some of the beans so that they start to break up and they release some starch into the fluid. Okay. Now I'm also going to add the remaining part of that Italian parsley at this point as well. Right, that's going to add some fresh flavor to it. So what you do, you're going to take your potato masher and you're just going to break up some of the beans, and you're going to thicken the soup. Now you can do this one of two ways. This is the way I do it, or you could take actually the beans out and mash them up in a bowl separately, but this seems to be the best way I prefer. So you can see that the beans are starting to break up, and the soup is getting very thick at this point. So this starchiness is a desirable texture to the soup here. And you want to let it cook for probably another 10 minutes or so just to develop this flavor. Then afterwards you're going to have to give it another taste. So here you see the finished product. Now the soup, as you can see, is kind of thick. It's got some body to it. It's got some beans that are whole, some beans that are smashed up. And at this point, it looks wonderful, but you got to taste it. Sometimes, when you release a lot of starch from the beans, it can kind of neutralize the flavor. If there's not enough acidity at this point, the soup will taste flat. So a remedy for that is one of two things. The first and the most successful remedy for that is to add malt vinegar. Malt vinegar adds a bit of acidity that counteracts the alkaline of the bean that's been released now that after you've smashed it. Or if it's not spicy enough, you add Tabasco sauce because it's vinegary and it's spicy, or a combination of both. And you want to add a little bit of a time and retaste to see if all the flavor that you put into this is now expressed. If you put a couple of hours of preparation and you get to this point and it tastes bland, you're going to feel like a failure. So what you want to do is taste it, add malt vinegar, add Tabasco sauce, and then you're going to realize that the body of this comes out and expresses itself to the maximum. So never want to stop short of finally tasting your soup to make sure you've created something that you're going to be proud of.